Good morning. We've just had the last board meeting of the year and also the last of this triennium, whereby we've now got quite significant change within our board coming up, and I thought I'd just report to you on some of the activities of the board and also our Hospital Advisory Committee. So the first item of business at the Hospital Advisory Committee was a discussion on staff wellbeing and some of the initiatives that are in play. I think you'll be aware of some of those, including various gym programs and the availability of counselling services on site, these can be accessed absolutely confidentially through EAP, but providing those on site seems to have been a really positively received initiative. But on top of that, we're also commencing, and we're the first DHB in the country to do this, a new wellbeing survey, and it's more than a survey, it's the Mayo Clinic Index, and it gives you an idea of how you're doing and also provides you with support and strategies for either self-help and or getting help if you are requiring that, and I think it also provides us with some guidance at a larger level as to how our staff are feeling. And I'm very aware of the pressure that you're under at certain times. Thankfully this month has been a little quieter for most, but we've had a pretty tough winter as usual. You'll be aware of all the drivers of that around the need of our population as well as the growth in our population. So it's great that we've got this program underway, and genuinely the board is very concerned about your wellbeing, as are the executive team, and so we're really trying to look at initiatives that aren't just tokenism, that will help and also give us the right sort of information going forward. The board meeting itself was long, actually. We didn't finish for about 8 hours or 9 hours, so a fairly big day, and some useful areas were covered in that, and I just thought I'd talk to you about one of those once I can get my iPad going again. So one of the first items on the board agenda was the healthy food environments position statement for the board, and I thought I'd read to you some of the areas that we're wanting to support, recognising that we're going to do everything we can to improve nutrition and activity, to reduce obesity and of course the outcomes of obesity, particularly diabetes and its impact on our health services, renal failure, and also amputations and other complications of diabetes. But obesity really is now the highest cause of avoidable mortality and avoidable health loss, so something we really have to make progress on. But really us making progress as a health service without the support from legislation and national food policy is something that makes it very hard for us to achieve what we need to. So we are also going to be advocating for a number of changes, and I thought I'd read through those. So we want to advocate for strengthening the government's childhood obesity plan to align with major recommendations from the WHO Commission on Childhood Obesity. Advocate for implementing effective central government policies to reduce exposure to children from unhealthy food marketing, the mandatory introduction of healthy food and drink policies in schools, early childhood learning environments and any other government-funded childcare facilities. That also includes strengthening further our own healthy food and drink policies within the District Health Board. We have to take a lead on this. Building healthy public policy to promote healthy eating and water-only sports events, sugar-free campaigns and healthy food workplaces. Creating supportive environments to promote access to free drinking water, good recreational spaces, and building transport infrastructure to enable active transport. Strengthening community actions to develop low-cost access to fruit and vegetables, and through the opportunity to grow their own vegetables and support Kaupapa Māori initiatives that focus on wellness and healthy eating, developing personal skills through providing services that enable parents to strengthen skills and lead their family in healthy eating behaviour and develop active lifestyles. The investigation of an effective sugar-sweetened beverage levy, along with reduced availability and consumption of sugar drinks. Accelerate reformulation initiatives by industry to reduce sugar, salt and fat in food, using regulations rather than relying on voluntary agreements. Introduce plain packaging for confectionery, crisps and high sugar products. And review what is currently a voluntary health star rating and hopefully make that compulsory. So those are the areas that we wish to advocate for, and the board were strongly supportive of that, so that's great, and we will continue to do that, and there's also some national work going on in that space. We had some really good patient stories, and one of them was about some really excellent care in Ward 4, so it's great, and particularly a tribute to nursing, allied health staff, medical staff and actually our clerical staff as well. We had a really cool story about a patient who had presented to ED with a cut to his head requiring stitches, and the wife wrote back to the emergency department and coronary care thanking them for the care, because rather than just simply stitch up the patient and send them home, they took further investigations thanks to engaging with the patient and getting from the wife of the patient the story that this man had had a number of falls and fainting episodes. And following Holter monitoring up in coronary care, he then had a pacemaker inserted in Auckland, and hopefully has solved all of his problems. So some really good comprehensive care, which obviously not only has helped that patient and their family, but also will avoid this man needing to come back in again, having had another fall or even worse. So really useful story. We went through, as usual, the quality and safety report and some good work going on there. And I just wanted to emphasise we get every 6 months a report from the Health and Disability Commissioner on all complaints to the Health and Disability Commissioner. And back in about 2010, 2009, we had a number of breaches relating to our care and complaints by the Health and Disability Commissioner. We've not had any since, and that's very much a touch wood at the moment, so I think that's not so much the issue. But what we also have seen is that we are now having the lowest rate of complaints in New Zealand, which must be an indication of some really good care from all of you. So thank you. We've got the Health and Disability System review continuing. Remember, that's a review that is led by Heather Simpson and a pretty impressive panel who have released their findings report and are now preparing the recommendations, which are due in March next year, and I do believe that'll be transformational, assuming the government does listen to the report and implement some or all of the recommendations, but certainly probably the most, potentially the most significant changes in the health system in the last 20 years. So I think that's a good thing, and I certainly hope that they identify the sorts of issues that we're finding are very challenging within the health system at the moment. Obviously, lack of funding is one of those, but others are the complexity of patients and their needs when you have a highly deprived population that is with high needs, and high Māori population, rural population, and an ageing population, and not to mention a rapidly growing population. Sounds like Northland, doesn't it? So I think the review is indicating that there needs to be a greater focus on those issues, so that's a really positive for Northland, I believe. We've had some work going on, and you hopefully may be aware of a survey which is underway at the moment online regarding our Northland Health strategy and the development of that. So we're asking for feedback on a number of questions. It's not a very long survey, so please, if you're interested at all, fill that in. We don't have all the answers to our strategy as yet, and so it's really important that we get your feedback. We're doing some health needs assessment and data analysis, and then what we're wanting to do is develop a strategy which is going to be called Northland Health 2040, and that's going to be completed during 2020 after the review, so that it takes into account some of those recommendations, but also after a lot of further meetings. We want to have a lot of engagement with all of you, or any of you that do want to be engaged in this, which will help hopefully set the direction going forward. And obviously with any strategy there is the need to identify priorities, and because we can't do everything, but we're hoping that this will set the direction for the next 20 years for the health system in Northland, but will be flexible enough to accommodate all sorts of change that we know does happen. So an important document guiding us going forward, and so please get involved and contribute to that if you can. We've had mixed advice from the Ministry of Health and Capital Investment Committee recently, but overall I've got to say really good news. And the great news is that you may be aware that last year our building program for the Whangarei Hospital, and particularly a Whangarei Hospital redevelopment, a really big building program, was put on hold. That was mainly due to some of the pressures from the recent earthquakes in Kaikoura and instability among buildings, particularly in earthquake-prone areas. And fortunately, despite us not being one of the most earthquake-prone areas, we've had a lot of work going on in the background. You might have seen people in suits and very well dressed walking around the hospital, quite large numbers. I think I've shown probably about 5 or 6 groups through the hospital over the last little while. Well, all of those were groups that were strategically important to us getting support for a rebuild of Whangarei Hospital, and with that and a number of condition reports and other reports provided to the Ministry and Capital Investment Committee, I'm glad to say we're back on track and considered one of the very highest priorities for funding over the next few years, and that will be probably a multi-year funding and will need to be built in stages, because it's really a very significant redevelopment. As you know, most of our hospital needs to be rebuilt, so that's terrific news. And so the pause hadn't been too long in the end, and it was indicated it was going to be a lot longer. And so we were also informed that partly because of that we wouldn't be receiving all of the funding that we'd asked for, and we certainly asked for much more than we were going to be allocated, but we were hoping to build quite significant building parallel to the maternity block, and also to build another story on the maternity block. So we still intend to build on top of maternity, or at least fit out the second floor and possibly also fit out the third, but we won't be building that new building because they want to make sure that we divert as much funding into a new hospital rather than just a single new building. And so good news, but also a little challenging. But we have been allocated between $40 and $50 million to build more capacity within our wards, and to probably increase our bed stock quite significantly over a period of time. And the critical things we need to do is to make sure that we have an acute assessment ward, even if it's not co-located with ED, and also to build or refurbish, but hopefully build a new laboratory. So those are the biggest priorities, but also to create more bed stock for the next few years until we do have a new hospital. So you can understand that tension between refurbishing a very old building and saving as much money as possible for a rebuild of a new hospital, but we need to do and get the mix of those correct, and I think this probably will get there, although it's a little disappointing that we didn't get as much as we'd hoped for. I think the bigger prize is really worthwhile reaching for, and it really looks like we're well on track again with that. Okay, we also got support for our regional community collaborative care IT program, so we're going to be working through deciding on the preferred vendor for that, and this is the replacement of our very ageing and unsupported now, or soon to be unsupported, JADE system, and so some good news there. And that's the first major IT program to be supported by government for many, many years, so that's great news. We are struggling financially, as you may be aware. We've got a planned deficit of $12.8 million, and we're about 4 months into the year. We're about $500,000 adverse to that. So certainly any initiatives that you can suggest and or things that you can do to help us continue to be as frugal as possible, that's great. But I know all of you are trying to do that and very aware of the financial circumstances. We already have a significant deficit planned, and so any more than that will put really significant pressure on our cash reserves, which means we can't do other things. So, so important that we do hold to that deficit. I want to acknowledge our measles campaign again, and the great work so many of you have been involved in, public health, nursing and medical officers of health, and the whole team there, as well as general practice and pharmacies are now going to be allowed to vaccinate, which is great news. It does seem that the outbreak is, I guess, somewhat less in Auckland than it was, but still we are seeing significant new cases, and in fact we're up to 105 cases of measles in Northland alone. So we've certainly been hit as hard as Auckland and Waitemata, nowhere near as hard as Counties Manukau, but still it's been a significant problem for us and a real challenge getting our immunisation rates up, and I think everybody who's been involved has done a fantastic job, and not just vaccinating but also containing families, and that's been really challenging at times. Just wanted to mention, which was reported in our report, the impact of strike action. We've had 158 days where one of our workforces has been on strike in the last year, either partially or for full days. So it's certainly had a significant impact on all of you, and I want to acknowledge nobody wants to strike. Everyone has a right to strike, but it also puts a lot of pressure on people's colleagues, and obviously patients do suffer. So I'm really hopeful some of the industrial action that we've got going at the moment will be settled fairly soon. So yeah, that's a real challenge for us trying to deliver health services with all of this going on. We had a long discussion about emergency department, patient flow. A letter from one of our staff was considered, and some data put forward around that, and the ongoing pressure in the emergency department, certainly far too small, overcrowded, and particularly the lack of an acute assessment ward. So that really is our highest priority, to create that extra space, and so that even if it's not co-located, it will take pressure off some of our emergency department and patient flow. But one of the other areas is patient flow through the hospital, and at times people getting blocked there. So ED, we're really conscious of the pressure on that's there. The GP shortages, there's been a bit of media activity about that. Actually, even today there was something in the newspaper front page, and so we're very aware of that and are working with Mahi Tahi Hauora, the new primary health entity, and hopefully making some progress, a lot of different strategies. And just want to acknowledge up in Kaitaia our staff who have taken on the overnight call for general practice, but there's a lot more to do both in Kaitaia and Whangarei, and it's just not acceptable to have patients waiting weeks to get into a GP appointment, because we know what happens then. People delay care, they get complications of care and end up in our emergency department hospitalised or even worse. So really important we do get that sorted out as soon as possible. I've talked before about one of our small communities, Whangaroa, and their challenges accessing regular, safe, effective general practice services, not to mention their financial challenges. So we've been working pretty hard with them and Mahi Tahi Hauora, and the Trust, Whangaroa Health Services Trust, has contracted with a new provider, Whanaora Community Care, which has a number of clinics in counties Manukau and across New Zealand, and so we're really confident that that's going to provide the sort of care that that community needs, so that's good news. We've still got, of course, 3 significant builds to commence, and also the endoscopy suite to complete. So the cardiac cath lab, new theatres, and Bay of Islands Phase 2, which is particularly going to be primary care, outpatients and a renal unit, are all to be built, and as you know, we've got funding for those. The funding is pretty tight, and we've had to take quite a lot of time trying to get those to within an affordable phase, and unfortunately we can't go back to government for more money, so that's it, and we'll need to do what we can within that funding. So just working through that with the board and also with our teams, and there's a lot of planning going on, and starting to commence building on those projects February next year for theatre, March I believe for the cath lab, and then probably mid-year for Bay of Islands Hospital. We've flagged a few other challenges that are occurring at the moment. One of them is access to our helicopter service, and some challenges there. Currently 4 helicopters providing service for Whangarei, Northland and Auckland, and unfortunately it does seem that that's not enough, so we're working with the Ministry of Health very closely, ACC, to look at what can be done about that to increase capacity and also improve the service, because there are times when unfortunately we don't have helicopter services overnight, and that probably happened occasionally in the past, but certainly seems to be happening more frequently now. And so yeah, we're working very closely and really concerned about patient safety in particular. So a lot of work going into that, and I'm quite heavily involved in that. So it's pretty much the board meeting, and giving you a little bit of a flavour of some of the risks and challenges that are also discussed in the public excluded side of the board. Look, we're coming up to Christmas. I want to acknowledge that that's hopefully going to be a time of rest for many of you and peace, but for some it may be still a lot of work to do and very challenging for you, but I want all of you to get some time over that period, hopefully to just recharge those batteries. I know how tough it is working in health, but also how rewarding it can be, and what you're doing is incredibly important. So I want to thank you all, genuinely thank you, and wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.